Welcome to Our.Love podcast, where we share insights from top scientists and relationship experts on all things about love that are out of the box, refreshing, and new. Now sit back, grab a cold drink or hot one if you prefer, and enjoy today's episode.
Hi, this is Dr. Keely Sykes-Rawlings, co-host of Our.Love podcast, where we visit with top experts in all things relationships. Today, I'll be talking with Doctors Phillip and Carolyn Cowan, prolific researchers, couples therapists, and authors on all things family relationships. Doctors Cowan have not only conducted long-term studies of hundreds of families, but have authored an important book entitled When Partners Become Parents, The Big Life Change for Couples. They are retired professors from the University of California, Berkeley, and they've been married for 63 years. Today, we will be discussing their research and practical tips for practicing support in a loving relationship. Phil, Carolyn, welcome. I'm so happy to have you with us.
Thank you. It's great to be with you.
Yeah, it's great to be with you. Yes.
I really look forward to our conversation. In preparation for today, I've taken some notes. I've got some questions to ask. I feel like we could probably talk for hours. Hopefully we can pack as much as we can into the time we have together, and maybe we'll have to have you back to continue. I'd love to start with the research that you've done and the outcome around these 5 areas of risk and protection for couples. And as I read it, it sounds like these are the 5 areas that if they're on board, the couple could be more protected. And if 1, 2, 3, or maybe all 5 of them are not on board, the couple could be more at risk. The first one that you've listed is the individual's mental health. Can you speak a little bit to that? And then I'd really like to talk a lot about the second risk protection factor, maybe more in depth, which is more about the couple's work. But would you like to speak to that first risk factor?
Sure. What we're saying may really sound obvious, but if an individual, if a husband or wife or co-parent, partner, if they're depressed, for example, or facing severe distress, it's just unlikely that they're going to have the resources to be supportive, loving, engaged parents with their kids, and the same thing with each other. So, I mean, there's just a lot of research that tells what, as I say, I think is the obvious, that if one person is struggling with mental health issues, or both, it's harder to conduct a reasonable, warm, loving, supportive family. It's not impossible, but it's harder.
But it needs to be addressed. And that's in our work. That's just one of the things we would focus on to make sure that the partners understand that this is going to get in their way if they don't take care of it and get some help.
Right. And in sort of the conversation around support, identifying that one or maybe even both partners are going through something and getting the support they need individually, as a couple, as a family, if someone is, as you say, right, struggling with anxiety, stressors, depression. Great. Okay. The second one is the one I really want to spend some time on, which is the way partners talk to each other, especially when dealing with differences or disagreements, can either be very protective for them or can put them at risk. What are your thoughts on that piece?
Well, here's the crux of what gets in the way in couple relationships. You know, if your partner brings up an issue and your reaction is, uh-oh, this means trouble, and you haven't developed a style where you can ask your partner to say a bit more about that. What is it that's worrying him or her about that? Where is this coming from? What's pushing their buttons? So that you can understand before you even think about trying to solve it or deal with the challenge. It's totally common for partners to have different ideas and different vulnerabilities about certain things. we kind of know that, but we don't always pay attention to it. And so if we start getting worried the minute it becomes clear that we disagree about something, or we have a serious conflict we haven't worked out, it can get in the way of having a warmer, more respectful conversation about what is this about, and what then eventually, what might we do about it?
What we're hoping to do, what we're hoping that couples can do, for example, is instead of somebody says something and the other person says, I disagree, and it starts to escalate and you get into an attacking exchange, instead of that is to do what our friend and colleague, who's no longer with us, unfortunately, Dan Weil, talked about: get on the platform and try and figure it out. So instead of attacking, you want to try and establish a collaborative, and this may sound really weird, but if you get into one of these back and forths and it's not too high and you can still talk to each other, of kind of interviewing the other person. I'm saying, well, you're really upset about this. What's going on? I don't understand it. Rather than saying, you're wrong, I'm right.
It's not my fault.
Right. So what you're suggesting is finding a way to connect around the problem, and this idea of being up on a platform. To me, the image of that is being side by side with my partner, up above and sort of looking down together at something, rather than being kind of under the platform and with boxing gloves on almost.
Right. It's sort of like, what is going on here? Let's take a look. How can we understand this?
So it becomes more collaborative than attacking.
Yeah.
Or withdrawn. The other alternative often is to back off and not talk about it.
Right.
And that just doesn't solve the problem either.
Right. And that also requires kind of, in my mind, dropping the anger and the resentment, and somehow finding a way to join. Any suggestions on that?
So this is where the what we were talking about first can play a role. If one of the partners, or even both, are depressed or really anxious, especially about this topic, whatever it is that just came up, it's going to be difficult to be more collaborative. But we're trying to help partners recognize and be more conscious about what's going on, so that they can do something more effective and satisfying, not terrifying, because some partners will get so worried that they'll pull away and withdraw and not have the conversation. And that doesn't help either, unless it's, I need a break, let's come back to this in an hour. That would be fine.
Right. And in fact, again, I'm such a visual person. I need a break. I need to take the boxing gloves off, take a break in my corner, get some water, and then come back and hop up onto it, right? Kind of hop up onto the platform. I like that image a lot.
You said drop the anger. I'm not sure that that's very easy to do. One thing that you can do is to say it, but calmly, of, I'm feeling so strongly about this. I'm worried that you're just going to come back at me here. I need to tell you that this is really upsetting. So instead of squelching it, of trying to find a way to say it in a more supportive way.
And I heard you in that example, Phil, using an I statement and also talking very calmly, rather than, you always leave the wet towel on the floor, right? How let's use that as an example. How might someone rephrase that? If one of the partners is really frustrated with the wet towel on the floor every day?
Something like this might help. When I see you leave the towel on the floor, I'm getting upset about this. It bothers me. It's just one of those things that bothers me. And maybe could we find another way to do this? That because I didn't want to tell you, because I was worried that this would turn into a fight. That's probably too much right there. I would say about half of it and then stop and wait for a response.
Yeah, yeah. And then engage with that other part. But again, it's the I statement and it's the tone of voice and it's the sharing about how I feel rather than your I don't know, I think the other sounds like, right, you're a bad person.
Right.
Exactly.
Right. To go with the vulnerability it leaves you with rather than, you can't expect me to be doing this all the time.
Right, right. Oh, and I'm so excited to talk about the relationship and how it changes when kids then come into the picture because it's so, at least in my personal experience and certainly working with couples in my office, it really changes that dynamic. Well, I shouldn't say often, it often really changes that dynamic. Yeah.
Well, what our studies begin to show over time, because we've followed couples over time and talked about all these different parts of their relationships, and in some cases, we've worked with some of them in a group for a long time, and in others, we haven't. And when we compare what happens in those relationships with the intervention and without, we can see that if we can help them reduce the anger and anxiety that we're talking about, and if we can help them have this more collaborative way of meeting the disagreements and challenges that they have, amazingly, it may sound obvious also, their ability to be there and be parents for their kids improves. They're more taken care of. They're less, anxious and deprived. So their parenting becomes less harsh and more responsive. And imagine that their kids have fewer behavior problems.
And we found they do better in school. They do better with their peers, even a few years after these groups end. So it's a kind of system of all of these things working together or trying to reduce the risks and increase the good parts of the family.
So what you're suggesting is happy couple, happy kids, or happy couple, happy and successful kids. And I don't mean successful in sort of the traditional, whatever the traditional term is, but good behavior and happy and potentially well adjusted.
That's it. It's another thing that sounds sort of obvious, but it's missing in a lot of parenting classes and parenting books that focus on what a parent does with the child. Yeah. That's really important, what a parent does with the child. But even more important is the atmosphere in the home in which the child is growing up. And that's governed a lot by the couple. Yeah. And it's by the couple's intimate relationship with each other. And it's also their co-parenting relationship. Can they be collaborative and not undermining in the co-parenting? But we have lots of evidence from our studies and lots of evidence in other studies that yes, if the couples are doing better, it's more likely that the parenting is going well and that the kids are doing better.
And that sort of leads us right into this third risk protection factor on the list of 5 that you've identified. The third one says the relationship between each parent and their children. It can be either a risk factor or a protective factor. Unresolved disagreements between parents on basic aspects of parenting can make it harder for the parents and the children.
So this is connected both with what challenges them as a couple and as co-parents. And it relates to the fourth thing that's on our list, which is, okay, what went on in the relationships between their parents, the parents' parents, the grandparents, yep, and between the grandparents and this adult child? And which of those things worked well for them and which got in their way or made them frightened or feel like they weren't worth a lot that they want? And if they can understand more about that and take some time with it and appreciate each other's background that they're bringing to this family, they have a much higher possibility that they can change the tone in this family now if there were things that really didn't work well for them when they were growing up. And that's left out of an awful lot of parenting talk.
Yeah.
That is where are your models? And if you don't have positive models, some of our parents say, I know what I don't want to do, but I don't know how to do something different that would be more positive.
Right. Right. Yeah. Chapter 1 of a parenting book could be even like a survey that each of the partners takes around, this is what worked well for me in my childhood. This was what didn't work well. This is how I'd like to do things differently. Are we on the same page? And do you understand where I'm coming from? These are the hurts I'm carrying with me.
That's exactly right. And just one more thing to add to the parenting part. I think parents these days are struggling with this issue, especially if they're working hard and even more with COVID. Parents know that it's helpful to be warm and supportive to your kids, but it's also important to set some limits and to be there to provide some structure for the kids. And so parents struggle with that. Some parents are very structured and maybe not as much warmth as they would want to be. Some parents are very warm but not structured, and the kids often become anxious in those situations. So those are the kind of things that can be changed, although it's a little hard to change them, that really help in the family.
But again, appreciating what your models were,
Yeah.
or what your models are in the community, and trying to think more consciously about what it is you're trying to do, what kind of atmosphere you're trying to create in your parenting, and then working together to see how you can get closer to that. And that's what most of our work has been about.
Yeah. How would you suggest a couple have that conversation about past hurts? I mean, I think for many couples that would require a tremendous amount of vulnerability.
Right. Well, one of the things we've been doing over the years is working with small groups of couples who are at a similar stage. They're about to have their first baby or have had their first children, or their kids are about to make the transition into school, to formal schooling, or later on in life, their kids are becoming adolescents and so on. And one of the things that helps is to hear what other parents are going through. The most common thing that people say years after they've worked with us in some of these groups is, I discovered we weren't the only ones who were being challenged by these things, or I didn't feel any stigma for being so poor or for having some challenges. It can be very relieving, but without some kind of more structured or formal way of doing that, it's up to each couple to figure out how they're going to be able to talk about some of these things. And sometimes they might benefit from some professional help in doing so.
Right.
I had a thought while you were talking of using an exercise from the group that might help this. In the groups, what we have people do is give them 4 pieces of paper, and they write down 2 things that they want to bring from the families they grew up in, and 2 things that they don't want to bring from the families they grew up in. They put them in a paper bag. And then they draw out their different papers and they discuss it. It's a gimmick in a way, but it turns it from something you do when you're in the middle of a fight into a game with a structure with some rules. And it brings the heat down and enables people to just, again, get on. It's a very platformy kind of strategy, something like that.
Yeah, I love that idea. And the opposite of that is in a fight saying, you act just like your mother, or you're treating me like I'm your, child, or this is all because of the way your dad treated you. Yeah, it takes it out of that and into sort of out of that place of anger and more into a place of, again, sort of some hurts that maybe we're all carrying with us.
Well, when we do some of these have some of these conversations more formally in these couples groups that I mentioned, one of the things that happens is that sometimes a partner will discover something about the way their spouse described this incident growing up, or why I'm so sensitive about that, in a way that helps them appreciate more why they have different ways of responding to their kids when the kids are misbehaving or being difficult or whatever. And sometimes that tones down just being angry and saying that's not what you do with kids, 4-year-olds or 12-year-olds.
Right.
And we also spend some time trying to help them think about what's reasonable given the age and stage their child or children are at. Because some people just don't have a very good idea about that, what you can expect of a 2-year-old, what you can expect of a 10-year-old, and so on. So some of that needs a little bringing together so they can figure out why they get in trouble over these things.
Yeah. And I can't wait to talk to you a little bit more about support between the couple and setting expectations, even with your partner, right? There are expectations we set for a 2-year-old, a 5-year-old, a 12-year-old, an 18-year-old. Those are all so different. But even setting expectations in the couplehood, I think, is really important. I'm going to put that idea just on hold for a second. I want to get to the fifth area of risk and protection, and then we'll go back to this idea of expectations. So the fifth piece you say is support or lack of it from friends, family, community, and organizations. It sounds like another thing that you found in your research is it's not only support among the couple, but it's outside support as well.
Absolutely, outside support. We tend, especially if you compare it to 100 years ago, we are living isolated lives instead of living in farming communities with our in-laws and our relationships and our cousins and things like that. We're living in places in cities and alone. And it gets to be fairly distorted there, where you have a hothouse of the couple and you expect each person to provide all the things that you need, where really we need connection with others. We need connection with our families, especially if it's a good connection. And we often need help from outside agencies or outside services. And we need to, I know there's a stigma sometimes about that, but we need to find ways to get support outside the two people and to marshal resources. And people who can do that tend to be better off in their families. One of the big ones, and we haven't talked about this yet, is work. Work can be a source of great enjoyment. Work can be a source of great stress, and it spills over.
Right.
That is, stress at work, this is obvious. Stress at work spills over into the family. Stress in the family, employers should know more about this. Stress in the family spills over into work.
Most definitely.
So to the extent that you can make it more supportive, to the extent that that's possible, or gaining support from other things. If stress at work is high, maybe you need some other source of friends or meetings or other ways of getting nurtured.
And the groups that you've run in your research sound like that's exactly what they're formulated around: support from other people going through similar life stages. Am I right? Is that what the...
Exactly. I mean, our attitude about it all is, making families is really difficult and challenging. And it's not a simple matter of just knowing how to do it all, especially these days. And in our most recent work in these groups, we've actually been working with in small groups, hundreds of very poor, low-income families. And the stress for them is immeasurable if they're having to decide with their meager income whether to buy food or pay the light bill. I mean, it's really serious stuff. but instead of allowing them to just get discouraged and say, there's no way I can do all this, we're trying to create a community and also let them know about help that is available in some of their communities so that it's not entirely on their shoulders.
Yeah.
And that will help if they can do a little bit of that and have, as Phil was alluding to, not feel shame because they need some help or they need more childcare and paid leave and all these things that, of course, some of our political forces are fighting about, then they can feel as if other people are on their side and trying to be helpful rather than just leaving them stuck in this very stressful atmosphere.
Yeah. Yeah. I know in the communities where I work, there are lots of resources around new couples couples who are newly parents. So mom and mom, dad and dad groups, parent groups where baby is just born. I'm not really aware in our communities of groups for parents of teenagers. It doesn't seem like that's, I don't know. It doesn't seem like that's, maybe they're there and I just am not aware of them, or maybe they're not as socially acceptable in some way. But I feel like that transition from parenting a child to parenting a teen would be such an important time to have a group of adults to sit around and say, just like many of us did, boy, I'm so tired. My child just gave up his nap and I'm like dragging through my day, right? When they were little, or boy, is your baby fussing when you've introduced X, Y, and Z food? In the same way to say, oh, what are you doing about rules about parties and teenage years? Or what are you thinking about the romantic scene for our teenagers? Or how are you handling this transition? Are there teen parenting support groups?
Two things. We're not aware of any. There's an occasional one in an occasional community, but really this is not something that happens reasonably. But the thing that I want to emphasize is that groups that do happen are often attended just by moms. And about 90% of the people in parenting groups at any age are mothers. And what we hope to do is to try and change people's heads who offer these groups to make sure that they are more, not just saying, oh yeah, dads can come when the group's at like 1:00 in the afternoon, but we really want to recruit the dad. Now, whether the dad's the biological dad or the boyfriend or whoever is parenting, the two people who are parenting this child, or more than two people who are parenting this child, come together. That's really important.
Well, you can see that the things we've been talking about, if we're only speaking to one parent, but there are several parenting figures for these children, you're not maximizing your potential to get them both on board.
Yeah.
And to expect mothers to go home and tell the fathers what they learned in these groups doesn't work very well. And there were people initially who started the idea of working with fathers, but they didn't have mothers there. And those didn't work very well either for the outcomes they wanted, because if you have them together, you've got the relationship right in the room,
right,
and you can work with it. And it makes such a difference. And it's not only the groups are helpful because you're not only hearing what your partner is saying, but you're hearing what someone else's partner is saying. And sometimes that makes it easier to have an aha moment.
Yes.
And to think these things through collectively.
Again, it's focusing on the couple in parenting, not just on one parent. And in my experience, I've seen many a 50-some-year-old woman in my office in a heterosexual couple who says, my kids are grown and leaving the nest, and I'm exhausted from parenting. And there hasn't been a lot of shared responsibility And now we have a couple issue because there hasn't been really truly co-parenting.
Exactly. And one of the points I want to make is that, people often when we talk about this say, but there's so many single moms and some single dads, actually.
Yeah.
That's true, sort of, but not really. Most women are parenting the child with somebody, and the somebody could be their mom or their dad. It could be their sister. It could be a boyfriend. It could be a girlfriend. So there's somebody else involved, and the relationship between the parent that we're talking about and the somebody else, that's what we're really focusing on. That's what's really important.
Yeah. I'd love to go. Oh, Carolyn, did you want to add something? I'd love to go back to this idea of expressing expectations in the couplehood. This love skill of support is defined by love.com as hear and hold. Right? You have to be able to hear what the other person is feeling, thinking, and then you have to hold it, not push it away, not disregard it, but you have to physically and mentally hold it. And one of the things we go on to talk about is this idea of expressing expectations. Any thoughts about that piece as it relates to your research, both in couples, but also couples who are becoming parents?
Well, especially in the groups that we did, which were from before the child was born, first child was born, to after, we did a lot of, that's what the group was often about. It was talking about what are your expectations? What about who's going to do what? Who does what now around cleaning up and making decisions? And who's going to? We actually asked them to fill out a questionnaire. Who do you think after the baby's, who's going to look after the feeding and the washing of diapers and taking people to the doctors? We found that the couples actually were fairly unrealistic, thinking that it was going to be really shared. And it tended not to be.
Yeah.
The point also was that when they were more disappointed with their early expectations, they were feeling more depressed about it. What we're trying to say is, it's not that if you can, in that kind of transition, really plan it out and be right on top of it and have a plan, but the fact of discussing your expectations before something happens makes it less of a hot issue when you're dealing with the thing that you're talking about.
Well, because then after the babies were born, what comes out a lot is that they kind of think they're going to be these modern couples, different than their parents. They're going to have a 50-50 split, right, which is very rare. Although in dual worker families, there are some who actually pull that off, and then they're both totally exhausted. but the thing is that they can figure out what led to the fact that they're not doing it, dividing the who does what, which is what we call the questionnaire, as equally as they expected, and why. So he earns more. She's staying home to nurse the baby for a little while. So she gives up her work outside the family more than he does. He's working to support the family, but she's at home feeling unsupported because she has to do all the stuff with the babies and so on. But if they can understand where that's coming from, and maybe we can help them think about a small shift that would just feel a little more equitable and a little less burdensome, that they can, again, think more consciously about why this is happening, what they're trying to do, and how they might get closer to it.
Yeah.
And beyond just the who does what of it, when I have the feeling, this is not based on data, that when couples get into a fight about whatever, that a lot of the fight is about unsupported expectations. That is, that one person expected something to happen, but they never said it.
Yeah.
And the other person often would say, well, if you'd only told me, yes. So when you get into a fight, a difference, something is happening like that, you might want to go back to a discussion of, well, what were you expecting here?
Yeah.
And what about that didn't happen?
You have researched and come up with some questions that partners can ask each other to make support more likely. I'd love to get to those. The first one is to ask, and you're very clear, not in the middle of a fight. These are conversations to have outside of you left your wet towel on the floor again, right? The first one is, what's the issue that's worrying you most today? It's a beautiful place to start.
The most amazing thing to have, what happens in these groups is that people say, in effect, you're interested in what my experience is.
Yeah.
And that gives me time to think, say it out loud and think about it more consciously. So it's almost like being, if you can stand it, being a bit of an interviewer with your partner about what is this really about and how is it affecting you, instead of getting all uptight and worried that this is going to turn into an insoluble argument.
Right.
I mean, couples do ask, what was your day like, dear?
Yeah.
They do ask that, but that could be a front for somebody to say all of the good things or one good thing that happened. That's great to share that, but it doesn't usually unearth what's the thing that's on their mind that's worrying them most.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. And the second question?
Well, as we framed it for you, it was, okay, so if I'm worried or depressed, how would you like me to react when you're talking to me about this, so that I can have some idea. I mean, some partners are just so afraid of conflict, that they run away from it and they don't take the time to ask more about what's really going on. They just get scared it's going to become either a big fight or insoluble, or somebody's going to walk out and slam the door. And that's not very helpful to either of them. And it's certainly not helpful to the atmosphere in which their kids are listening in the other room, hearing and getting frightened. And we know that happens from talking with the kids as well. So again, what an unusual question.
Yeah, and what an important question, because sometimes person A might want solutions, or sometimes they might want just comfort. And and I know personally in my own relationship, and certainly watching couples in my office, if person A just wants comfort and person B comes with a litany of solutions, now we're off to the races, right? Yeah.
One of the most common pitfalls where conversations get off the rails, where somebody wants support, somebody wants just to be heard, and the other person is saying, well, you could do this or you could do that.
Yeah.
And implicitly, and you're not doing this and you're not doing that, so it's your fault.
The third question you have is, what's the main thing you'd like to carry over from the families we grew up in? And what's the main thing you hope we'll do differently from the families we grew up in? We talked a little bit about that before, and I love the idea of having making it sort of a game, and again, outside of conflict, not while you're in conflict, but as a prevention.
Right. And you can do that, before your first child comes along, or long after, when you've got 1, 2, 3 kids. It's very informative and needs to be a bit exploratory, because couples don't often do that in a sort of systematic way where they hear each other out about that. And they don't need to do it all in one conversation.
Well, yeah, I just had an aha moment because as the children age and change and their development and their stage changes, the things that are going on for the parents and their past history changes, right? So a conversation with my spouse about what it was like when he was a teenager is very different than a conversation we've had about what was it like when you were, little in your house. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So an evolving conversation around that. I love that. That's beautiful. Number 4. Oh, go ahead, Carolyn.
So I was just going to say, you were sort of fastened for a few minutes on teenagers. What do you do when you can't get your teenager to talk to you?
Yeah.
How was your day? Fine. What are the plans for tomorrow? Don't know. I mean, and if you don't understand that in a lot of kids growing up and trying to get a little bit separate from their parents and become independent, that's part of the process.
Yep.
And you just natter at them, so they pull away even more.
Yep.
That doesn't do it. It doesn't help the relationship at all. So one understanding that may be part of ordinary development for young teenagers. And 2, if they're worried about risky behavior, how to handle it, how to talk about it, how not to push them away, in effect,
Right.
can be very important.
Right. And being on the same page with your partner,
Yes.
that in their history, and to take it even a step further into that supportive environment, to have 5 or 6 other couples who are also parenting teens, how beautiful would that be?
Right. Yeah. People say things like, well, that was our problem with Richard all the time. Here's what we finally discovered worked a little better. And they can begin to build models themselves of some other things they might try.
Right. Beautiful. I'm watching our time. I want to make sure we get through our list. Number 4. Would you like to read that question?
The question is, what's the thing you like best about how I relate to our kids? And what's one thing you hope I will change? I want to preface that starting with something you like before you get to the thing that is very important to me. When we were conducting some of these groups and we would then debrief afterwards, I wanted to hear what went well before I wanted to hear Carolyn talk about what didn't. And
we were doing these groups at the university in a big conference room. And it was the first time we were sort of inventing it as we went along. So we'd come out to the parking lot and get in the car to drive home. And my first reaction would be, I really think about what didn't go so well or what we might have done. And Phil would go, oh, and it took us a long time to realize that was the problem in our discussing it. He wanted to know, did something go well? Was I okay? So we had to learn how to do that in a better way.
So that's part of the source of that, but in this case, having to do with the kids, not just starting with the thing you disagree about, but is there anything, and there almost always is, that you like, that you like about what I do.
Yeah, and one of the love skills that love.com focuses on is appreciation. So it allows you to bring appreciation into the couplehood. I really appreciate it when you X, Y, and Z with the kids, when you wrestle with them, or when you take them out on an outing, or whatever those things are. Yeah.
In the groups that we do now, there is, and they're 16 weeks long. In about the 14th session, we have people write a letter of appreciation to their partner and then reveal it at the last meeting. It's a very touching.
That's beautiful. Oh, that's really beautiful. And I think with modern technology and busy schedules, many of us don't write to each other anymore. It's sort of I think it's a lost art form for couples. Yeah, that's beautiful.
Very true.
Let's end with the last question.
So the question as we framed it was outside of me or our family members, who can you talk to when you're stressed out? One of the things we found early on when we were talking about with these couples, many couples with who's important in your life to you, is that women, many of them, could name 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 people they could talk to. The men could not come up, sometimes with anyone or with more than one person they could talk to. So, women some of them were doing a lot of processing of stuff, but the guys had nowhere to go. And again, I think that's why these groups are so powerful, because they're hearing each other, but they're hearing other guys and other gals talk about these things in a more natural way that says, this is all family related stuff and it's relevant to fathers and mothers.
Yeah.
So again, we didn't realize that this was so unusual, but we've discovered over time, especially reading what's out there in the research literature or the intervention literature, that it's very unusual to have both men and women in these groups talking about these things.
Yeah. And the support that comes from that, from outside of the couple to the couple is, it just sounds like it's a tremendous help.
It's so humanizing, They learn more about what really goes on in other couples, other families, and they don't feel so reticent to say what's actually going on in our house or in our relationship, because it doesn't seem so far out or off the charts.
Yeah.
And that's very, very relieving.
So in closing, any last advice for couples that might be listening today? You clearly have had 60 some years of marriage and working together, I will say, and worked with hundreds of couples and families. Any closing thoughts around support, how to create a supportive environment?
One occurs to me that you asked. It's not easy to be supportive when you're really upset. You're upset either with your partner or by something else, something at work, that you need to carve out some time. It can be 10 minutes. It doesn't have to be a whole long date or a dinner or something like that. You need to carve out some time to check in.
Yeah.
Either with some of these questions or just to check in with how you're doing.
Yeah.
In order to keep this connection alive, because it's a struggle. It's a struggle. People say relationships are work. Yeah, but it's because there's so many things going on that you need to be more deliberate about it than we usually are. That's my thought.
We're just expecting so much of people in families these days.
Yeah.
And clearly both the political and but even in the larger world, some of the things that are going on are so stressful that the more we can help people not have to run away from it or bury themselves, under the blanket because they simply can't face all that, the more we can help build supportive atmospheres for the individual parents, for their relationships together as couples, and especially for their relationships with their children. They really will see the difference in how their kids are behaving over time if they can pull it off. And that's what's been so exciting about this work with families in, Mexican American, African American, poor white families, Asian American. We have groups like this going on in the UK, based out of London, and some in Canada, and some in other parts of the United States. And the results seem to be quite consistent if we can get them to come and make it a safe place to talk about these things and stay. So we know that it can work.
That's wonderful. I thank you so much for your time today, for your decades of research on this really important topic. If people want to find out more about your work, where might they go?
They can email us at ccowan@berkeley.edu or pcowan@berkeley.edu.
We would be delighted to respond.
Oh, that's lovely. Thank you so much. And maybe I can get you to come back and talk with us some more. I'd love to have a full conversation with you about empathy, but that's maybe for next time.
That would be fine. I really enjoyed talking
Yeah,
with
it's been
you.
a pleasure talking with you. Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, take care. Thanks again.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks for listening to Our Love podcast. We hope you enjoyed today's topic. Please be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes and give us a 5-star rating to help others find us. We'll see you again next week, and we hope that you are experiencing your best love today.